Hey everybody, thanks for taking the time to join us today for this Partners in Research live event. I'm your host for today, Kevin Kugler. I'm the Executive Director of Partners in Research, and I'm really glad you could take the time to join us. So hopefully you're watching in classrooms all across Canada, and if you are, I'll remind you that you can use Twitter to tweet your questions to us today. So the hashtag for that is AskPIR. So get those Twitter feeds coming and we'll ask Dr. Smith some questions. Speaking of Dr. Smith, time for me to introduce my guest today. So Dr. Robert Smith is a associate professor at the University of Ottawa in the Department of Mathematics. The award-winning Dr. Smith, most recently, I must add. Congratulations on your recent award, and thanks very much for taking the time to join us today.
Well, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, good stuff. So I wonder if we could get started by maybe just having you do a better job of telling everybody out there a little bit about yourself and your career. And then I understand you've got some slides and things you can share with us today as well.
Yes, so I'm an associate professor, which means I have tenure. That means I'm a permanent professor at the University of Ottawa. I study infectious diseases using mathematics. So I did my undergraduate and master's and PhD all in math. And I guess I graduated sort of more towards the applied math side of things, and then got interested in infectious diseases because I really like applications of math. And I think that math is something that's often just taught to us as being a thing we should just know, and that's really boring, and nobody really wants to know that. In fact, math can be something that's incredibly useful, because math has one really, really powerful thing, which is it can predict the future. And that to me is amazing. Like, you need math. We need this for diseases. We need it for understanding, how species work, how finances work, how all sorts of things. And we want to know what's going to happen. Math is one of the few tools that can actually help us do that. And I think sometimes math is not always taught in the most entertaining and exciting way. I've been on a little bit of a mission to see if I can change that, because I think it can be really, really fascinating. So one of the cool things I do, aside from disease work, is I look at zombies. And so zombies for me are a great, fun way of thinking about how you would deal with a disease that you haven't seen before, because obviously we haven't seen actual zombies before. So we treat them like a disease. We use mathematics to create mathematical models to try and predict the future. So try and figure out how do you actually stop the zombies. Do you shoot them in the head? Do you set traps? Do you build moats? Do you hide in a shopping mall? Whatever it is, you can examine all these things, and you can do them all at once. And the really great thing about math is it's cheap. You don't need to run giant experiments. You can do all these equations, basically, on a piece of paper or on a computer, and you don't have to spend a lot of time doing clinical trials. So if we're talking about something more serious, you don't have to run trials with people on a vaccine to find out it's not going to work in advance. If you can figure that out with math, then you've saved a lot of lives and a lot of money by doing that. So math for me is a very, very, very powerful tool. But I do think of it as a tool. I think of it as something that's useful for solving problems in the world.
That is, that's really cool. And you're absolutely right. I think a lot of times, when we think about math, we think about, that one issue that we had in school growing up, or we had that boring teacher. Sorry for all you teachers out there, but, every once in a while you get somebody like that, and then it turns us off. But of course, there are wonderful people who are very excited about math and who can get us turned on by doing things. And I think that the way that you build in the zombies and creates that that excitement, that certain something that everybody says, well, geez, that's really interesting. What is that all about? How does that tie into zombies? It kind of gets their brains thinking. Which I guess is the point of it.
That's exactly it. The zombies want to take out our brains, but actually it turns out that's our greatest weapon against them.
Yeah, absolutely. I know my 6-year-old would love that. He's in love with zombies. He pretends to be a zombie and walks around the house all day long. So maybe that means in the future he'll be a mathematical genius if he listens to this podcast. So we'll see where that goes. So you've got some slides for us. Do you want to jump into some of those and we can start talking while we're waiting for some questions to come in?
Yes. So I'll just get those loaded up here. What I really want to talk about is, in this case, a bit more serious than zombies, is vaccination. So let me just see if I got that going. I had this working before. No. All right.
Just trying to show your slides, basically.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get it to full screen. I don't know how sorry, I had it working before and it's not working now. So that's okay.
I think we can still read the screen. That's all right.
Yeah, you can. So you can see the screen. Okay. All right. So I guess what I want to do is talk about just the idea of a HIV vaccine. And part of the reason I want to do that is because there is no HIV vaccine, and so math is something that can talk about things that don't exist yet. So I'll just kind of go through things very broadly. The idea is that if you have something that you want to deal with a HIV virus for, it's probably not going to work very well because new transmission prevention options tend not to work. So if you have a vaccine, it's probably going to be a pretty poor vaccine. And the danger is that if you introduce something that's not that great, it may result in new infections. So it may actually cause the number of HIV infections to go up. And what we'd like to do is say that at the bare minimum, we don't want to do that. Right? It's a sort of a first do no harm idea. We want to not make things any worse. And so HIV infects 40 million people worldwide. The search for a vaccine is over 25 years old, and we spend $625 million a year on HIV vaccine research annually. And so that's an enormous amount of money, and we don't have a vaccine. We've been doing this for about 25 years, and we've had no success. We've had a very, very, very minor success in 2009, and the vaccine didn't really work. It worked just a tiny bit, but not really enough for a wide release. And so this is sort of the holy grail of HIV research, is can we find a vaccine that will stop it? And if you think of vaccines, you probably think of something like smallpox, where we had a vaccine and it just stopped the disease, and then you never got infected again. But that's not actually how most vaccines work. Most vaccines, they protect you most of the time, or some of the time, but they don't always stop the disease. And so the World Health Organization has said that they'll take a vaccine that's 35% acceptable. Right? And what that means is that you can have dangerous things happen. So if the vaccine only works some of the time, then the worry is that we'll have an increase in unprotected sex. If people hear there's a vaccine available, they may say, well, now I'm protected, I can do whatever I want. I can go crazy. I can use, share needles, not use condoms. I can do all kinds of things. And that can happen for people who are infected. And it will also happen for those who are not infected, but then may become infected. It can happen if you've got the vaccine, and it can happen if you haven't. So I guess what we're really talking about is, can we make some predictions about human behavior? Because what humans are doing is really important. Humans are very unpredictable. We don't know if people are going to be more risky or less risky. If you know you're vaccinated, you may say, well, I'm vaccinated, I'll do whatever I want. Or you may have more access to information, and so you may know the risks better. And these are really tricky things, because that may happen if you're vaccinated, and it may happen if you're not vaccinated. Right? It may be that if you're not vaccinated, you may say, well, there's a vaccine out there, so I'll be more risky. Or you may say, well, I haven't been vaccinated personally, so therefore I'd better be more careful. So your risky behavior may go up or it may go down, and it may go up depending if you're someone who's vaccinated or not. So there's a number of vaccine candidates.
Sorry,
yeah.
For 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So just to kind of bring this down to the level of some of the kids that might be watching and some of the classrooms out there, I'll tell a quick story. So my son, whom I indicated earlier, is 6 years old, had the chickenpox recently. And, of course, I had it as a kid.
Yeah.
You probably did. We all had it, right? So he had the chickenpox, and that was fine. But we had a family down the road who had received the vaccine for chickenpox. And they wanted to come over for a swim. We said, well, come on over. But, my son has the chickenpox. So, they're like, oh, no, it's okay. We're vaccinated. Well, sure enough, they contract the chickenpox. So to your point, absolutely.
Yes, that's right. I think there's a belief that vaccines are impervious somehow, and that's not true. But the message is a hard one, because people like to believe in just black and white things. They like to believe either the vaccine works or it doesn't, and that's the only possibility. But of course, it works much of the time, right? Or it works under some conditions or so on. But those are very hard things to sell in the media and in the public.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I think the idea of the vaccine that we're talking about is a bit like what you're saying with chickenpox, that you can be vaccinated and you can still get infected. The vaccine is not necessarily stopping you doing these things. And so a HIV vaccine, can I just ask, can you see the slides on here? Are you seeing the changes?
I see the first one. I haven't seen any change.
No. Oh, okay, all right. So let me see if I can stop that and start again.
maybe just click on the slide on the left there. There you go.
Yeah, there we go. Okay. All right. How about that? Is that...
I can see the disease-modifying vaccine slide.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Excellent, excellent. Okay, so this is the idea of the vaccine. It lets you become infected, but if you're infected, you're less of a bad infector. So it means you're less likely to infect other people. That reduces your viral load, which means it's better for you because if I've got the vaccine and then I get infected with HIV, I'm going to live longer if I have less virus. But also for the population, it lowers my transmissibility. So that means that I'm less likely to pass it on to other people. So the idea is that I live longer, which is great for me, and also I'm less infectious for other people, which is great for the group. So the group being the rest of the world. And these things sound great. It's good for people to live longer, and it's good to not transmit it as much. Unfortunately, they're not always the same thing. Right? I would like to have less disease in the world, but me living longer means that I may actually be around much more to pass on the disease. So even if I pass it on less often, if I'm living 20 more years than I would have lived otherwise, I may actually end up increasing the number of infections. Right? So if you have a 35% vaccine, what that does is it stops infection 35% of the time, but then lets you become infected the rest of the time. But once you are infected, then you're less infectious, and so you have less virus, which means you pass it on less. And 35% is the level that the World Health Organization said they would accept for a HIV vaccine. So if somebody invents a vaccine and it only works 35% of the time, they'll take it. And they said this will be fine. Really what's happening is the standards have gotten so low because we're so desperate for a vaccine that they'll take this kind of very poor vaccine.
Yeah, because
what we want to do is measure...
Sorry, I was just going to say, I suppose their other way of looking at that is from the opposite of 35, they're thinking, well, we're going to protect 65% of the population.
Yes. It's, actually, it'd be 65%. It wouldn't be protected. It'd only be 35% to be protected. And I guess you just hope that that's enough.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So can you see the page saying basic reproduction number?
No, I see the one about the efficacy.
Okay. All right. Let me just...
There we go.
There we go. Okay. All right. Maybe that's the best I got. Okay. So the basic reproduction number is just a simple way of understanding how diseases spread. So if I'm infected and I infect 3 people, then they infect 3 people and they infect 3 people and so on, then the disease will just spread like wildfire. So then we'll just have non-stop disease. But if on average I infect less than 1 person, so if it took 10 people to infect 9 and there's 9 infect 8 and they infect 7, then the disease will die out. And so we call this the average number of secondary infections. It's essentially a measure of how fast the disease spreads, and if it's larger than 1, it's expanding, and if it's smaller than 1, it's shrinking. And so what we do here is we just figure out there's a basic reproduction number for unvaccinated people and also for vaccinated people. So that's what I'm going to call my R0 and my RV. And so I just have the ratio of those two, so I'm just going to divide the two and say the fitness ratio F is RV divided by R0, and if F is very high, then we make things worse. So basically, if the number of infections from vaccinated people is very high compared to without the vaccine, then the vaccine has made things worse. So this is where I do a little math. It's not terribly much, but I'm just going to say that I want to take a combination of the number of secondary infections from vaccinated people plus unvaccinated people. And I do that by just writing the overall vaccine reproduction number, RP, as S times 1 minus psi RV plus 1 minus S R0. And that's just a way of saying there's some group of people who are not vaccinated, that's the R0 at the end. And so then the 1 minus S means those are the people you haven't vaccinated successfully. So those are the people that we have now. Right now, we've vaccinated nobody because there is no vaccine. So right now, S is 0. So there's no RV component at all, it's just R0. But then once I have a vaccine, I'll move some of those unvaccinated people to the vaccinated class. So now I have some vaccinated people, and so I'll have S of them, some proportion S, and this 1 minus psi basically says how good is the vaccine, right? So if the vaccine is is 35%, then that means 65% can still infect. So 1 minus that tells you how many people are still able to transmit. And of course, if psi is 1, then that means nobody can infect. So this whole term would be 0. So if the vaccine is perfect, then you would only get transmission from unvaccinated people. So what this is doing is taking into account the people who've been vaccinated as well as those who haven't. Okay, so I basically just want to say, when will things be worse? And things will be worse if I have more infections after the vaccine is introduced than I do before. So if my overall reproduction number, my RP, is larger than what I have now when I don't have a vaccine, then that means that my S 1 minus psi RV plus 1 minus S R naught would be greater than R naught that I have now. So if I just basically expand the brackets here, this 1 minus S R naught, there's a 1 times R naught, so I can cancel that with the R naught on the right-hand side. So I've just got now minus S R naught underneath there, and the S's in fact can cancel. So if I divide throughout by the S's, assuming I'm vaccinating some people, so it's not 0, then I've got this condition here which says that 1 minus psi times my fitness ratio must be greater than 1. So that means I've got a relationship between my efficacy of the vaccine, so how good the vaccine is, and this fitness ratio. So I have a perverse outcome, which means my vaccine has made things worse if f is greater than 1 over 1 minus psi. So I just divided by the 1 minus psi from the previous page. So what I've developed here is a threshold, and this threshold tells me I can predict whether the vaccine will make things worse or not, basically depending on the efficacy of the vaccine. So how good is your vaccine? So if I look at that visually, I can just plot that as a curve. So that's this curve along here. So my psi, my degree of protection against infection, is on the bottom, and my fitness ratio is on the top. So I'd like to be in the blue area. The blue area means I have a beneficial outcome, so at least I don't make things any worse. And the red area says I've got a perverse outcome. I made things worse by having a vaccine. All right? And we don't want to do that. We want to have a vaccine, of course, that makes things better. And you can see that if my vaccine is really good, so if my vaccine is sort of 80% or so, then I have quite a large blue area. But if my vaccine is pretty poor, like the World Health Organization said they'll have a 35% vaccine, then I don't have much blue. So I don't have much wiggle room. And what we mean specifically by that is that your fitness ratio has to be pretty close to 1. So it can be a little bit above 1, but being at 1 means that you can't have any more infections from vaccinated individuals than you would otherwise. Okay, so essentially what this means is I'd like to stay in the blue, and certainly if I stay below 1, I'm always in the blue. So I could say, well, I'll just be below 1, and then it doesn't matter how good or bad your vaccine is. If you have a vaccine, if I can keep the fitness ratio below about 1, then I'm good. And keeping it below 1 means, in practice, I can let it be a little bit above 1. If it's 1.1, that's okay. If my vaccine is really good, it could be 2 or 4. And by being 2 or 4 means I could have 4 times as many infections with a vaccine compared to without, and it still would not make things worse. All right, so it just allows people to live longer and infect more, even though they're infecting at a lower rate. Okay,
I'm going to interrupt
this idea of...
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
it's always a little bit of a delay on this, so I'm talking over you. Sorry about that.
That's fine. That's perfectly fine.
Yeah, okay. So just out of curiosity then, like the role of a mathematician in this, are you communicating with, the World Health Organization, or, when they're thinking about...
Yes, good question.
They consult you on this before they release a vaccine?
Yes. So what happens is we work on our results, and then we write them up and have them published in academic journals. And so this was published in the Lancet Infectious Diseases, which is a fairly high-profile medical journal. And in fact, yes, it did make its way into government policy. That at a point a bit after this, they started to look at what are mathematicians saying. Can we get some insights into the mathematicians? And so they wrote a policy document taking into account what everybody had been saying. So not just me or not just some other person, but all of us. What are we jointly saying? What are the common threads? And so they took this work actually and said, okay, this is telling us that we need to think about how to design vaccines a bit more clearly, so that we keep our fitness ratio below 1. And so that's something that then made its way through to researchers who are experimenting, doing work on monkeys and things like that to try and invent new vaccines, because we have very clear guidelines as to what will make things worse and what won't. So yeah, you're exactly right. This stuff does make its way to the World Health Organization. It does make its way also to researchers who are working in the lab to try and do this. So what you want is you want to understand what's happening in the future, which math can do, but then you don't want to leave it untested. So then you want other people to sort of follow up and say, okay, well, we've got some ideas now from math, so let's see if we can test them out. And math is actually often very good at showing the way forward, and then it gives people something to build on.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, okay, all right. So if I continue on, I just want to think about how we might have a bad outcome. And so one of the things is that if our vaccine causes more infections, right? As I said, it may just occur due to people living longer, right? And so I can break down my R naught into a number of factors. I can break it down into the transmission ratio, which is basically how likely are you to infect someone when you have a risky event. So if you have unprotected sex, what's the chance that infection will actually occur? C here is your number of sex partners. And then you divide by essentially the rates at which you leave. And the rate at which you leave is either you die from car accidents or heart attacks or just background reasons unrelated to the disease, or you leave the sexually active pool and you progress to AIDS. And so essentially the denominator here is basically how long are you in the pool for. And so our fitness ratio, which was the ratio of the two reproduction numbers, when I divide out by the number of sex partners, because the C's cancel. And what I have is some relationship between the transmission probabilities and essentially the time that you're infected for. So you're infected so long as you don't die or progress to AIDS, because there's no cure for HIV. You never go back. So once you're infected for life. And so what I can do is think about just plotting this as this is basically the additional years of survival due to the vaccine. So how much more life do you get? Right? And if the vaccine gives you 5 more years of life, so at this T star here, then that says you can keep the fitness ratio below 1 if you reduce the transmission probability sufficiently. So in this case, if you reduce it by about 25%. And so this is an explicit formula which says however many more years of life you want, if you want to get 20 years of life, that's great. That's what we want from a vaccine. We want people to live longer, and that's really good, except we need to reduce the transmission probability accordingly. Right? So you can't release a vaccine that doesn't reduce the transmission. Right? And just gives you more years of life. Years of life are great, that's good for an individual, but for the population, you also need to reduce the transmission because that reduces the power to transmit to other people. And even better than that, we can exactly quantify precisely how much you need to reduce by. And this red line here is just the critical value, which says that if you can reduce the transmission from where it is without a vaccine at 1 down to this critical value, which is about 25% of what it is, then the fitness ratio is always below 1. So then you can have as many more years of life as you want. A vaccine could let you live, 70 more years, and you'd be fine. So essentially what you want to do is just stay below this curve. And this is exactly what we give out to people that people designing the vaccine were able to implement. And they say, okay, yes, we want more life, but also we need to reduce the transmission, and that's critical. And I'd just like to note here, this is assuming people don't change their risky behavior. This is assuming that you have the same number of sex partners per year, or you share the same number of dirty needles per year, or so on. Of course, that's not necessarily true, right? People will increase their risky behavior. And so what I want to think now about is who is changing their behavior, and in particular, who's actually vaccinated. Because there are different types of people when you have a vaccine. All right? So if I never got the vaccine in the first place, I'm obviously unvaccinated. All right? But then I might get the vaccine, so I've gone to the center and gotten a needle, but then the vaccine doesn't take, which means it doesn't mount an immune response in your body. So you had the jab, but it didn't do anything, essentially. So when you walk out of the vaccine center, you're not vaccinated. Right? So you may think you're vaccinated because you got the needle, but you're not actually vaccinated. The vaccine can also wane over time. Some vaccines just wear off. So you may be vaccinated when you walked out of the center, but 2 weeks later, you're not vaccinated. And the last group is people who actually got the vaccine took, and the vaccine didn't wane. So that means only group D is actually vaccinated. Right? So the first 3 groups, they're not really vaccinated, but 2 of them think they might be. So this is very dangerous because it means that some people who got the needle may not actually be vaccinated, but they may change their behavior because they think they are. Right? So they may say, hey, I went and got a HIV vaccine, I can sleep with anyone I want, and that's very dangerous because they may not actually be vaccinated. So if they change their behavior, they're not vaccinated individuals change their behavior, they're really unvaccinated individuals. And so we don't know how individuals are going to change their behavior. They may do more dangerous things, they may do less dangerous things, and they may do it differently depending on who they are. The people who never got the needles may really curb their behavior. They may say, well, I'm not vaccinated, so I better be careful. But then they may be a small percentage of the people who are not vaccinated because of the other people for whom it didn't work. So what we need to do is really take into account everybody. And we need to know what the vaccinated are doing and what the unvaccinated are doing. And they may be making things worse and they may be making things better. Okay, so to quantify that, we're just going to have a little factor here, which is basically just the amount of change that the unvaccinated are having and the vaccinated are having. So how much are they changing their risky behavior? So I'll go back to that equation that we had for the reproduction number after the vaccine was introduced. And all I've done is I've introduced these changing factors. So S was the number of people who've got the vaccine. 1 minus psi is the number of people who are still infectious once the vaccine is taken care of. So psi of them are not infecting anyone, so 1 minus psi still are. RV is the number of secondary infections caused by vaccinated individuals, and that's multiplied by changes in risky behavior. Essentially, how many more sex partners are you having because you're vaccinated, or how many less? So MV may be larger than 1 or it may be less than 1. And similarly, the non-vaccinated people, there's 1 minus S of them that you didn't vaccinate. R naught is how many infections they cause, and then MU is changes in behavior. Did it go up or did it go down? And so if I replace the RV by F times R naught, so I put in my fitness ratio there, and I can divide throughout by my R naught, then I have this equation, and this is not as neat an equation as before, because before we could cancel the S's, and we just had an F in the psi equation. Now we've got S's, we've got psi, we've got F, we've got MV and MU. So there's a lot more factors at play here. We can quantify it. We can say, okay, this inequality here, that's what we want. That's, if we're larger than 1 here, so if we satisfy this inequality, we will make things worse. So on the flip side, if we're less than 1, then we'll make things better. But it's got a lot of factors. So what we can do is draw a surface. And I'm going to draw a surface, and I can only draw in 3 dimensions because I live in a 3-dimensional world. Right? So it depends on at least 5 factors. It depends on exactly 5 factors. So what I'm going to do is for a given efficacy, so for a given vaccine, it depends on 4 factors, but I can only draw 3 of them. So what I'm going to draw here is basically, this is the proportion I've successfully vaccinated, this is behavior changes in the unvaccinated, and this is the fitness ratio, and I'm doing all that when risky behavior in the vaccinated decreases by 10%. I think 15%, yes. And so this is like that previous curve from before with the red and the blue. I want to be underneath like before. But instead of a 2-dimensional curve like last time, now I've got a 3-dimensional curve. And so, a 3-dimensional surface. So I want to be underneath. And so underneath means I might have, for instance, a lot of people vaccinated, and the vaccine changes mean that unvaccinated people go down. So on this sort of line down here, that's where the unvaccinated are changing. If they reduce below 1, so if the unvaccinated curb their risky behavior and have a good vaccine, then as long as my fitness ratio is reasonably low, then I'm good. So I want to be under the surface. In the back corner here is if I have a good vaccine, but the unvaccinated increase their behavior. So that means that the people who are vaccinated successfully, I've got a lot of them, but the people who aren't are causing trouble. That's still okay because I've got a lot of people vaccinated. But the danger zone is down here. The really danger zone is down in this lower corner, where I didn't vaccinate very many people, and the unvaccinated are all increasing their behavior. So this is the real danger. This says that people say, hey, I heard there's a vaccine out there, I don't need to use condoms again, but I didn't actually vaccinate very many people. That's very dangerous. So that means I'm very likely to cause bad things. Now, the really good area is up here, but this is not very realistic.
Yeah, sorry, I've got to cut you off here because we've got about 1 minute left, and teachers are busy, they're in classes, all that kind of stuff, right? So unfortunately, we're running out of time. But
no problem.
If there was one message that you wanted to leave the teachers and the students thinking about in terms of math, what would that takeaway message be?
I think that math is something that's not just abstract. Math is something that's useful. And so this is a fine place to stop, actually, because I think what we were able to see here was how to deal with, a vaccine, how good the vaccine is, how people actually change. Do they change their risky behavior? Does it go up or down? We can precisely quantify these things using math, and we can give it out, as I said, to World Health Organization, to people doing experiments and so on. We can interface, I think, between sort of the mathematical sciences and the other sciences. So both the social sciences in terms of what people are doing in their actual day-to-day lives, and also the biological sciences in terms of how do you design a vaccine. And so linking these together, to me, I think is actually really crucial, because we're not just doing math for its own sake, we're doing math to try and understand what's happening in the world. And in my case, diseases, but you can do it for species in rivers, you can do it for humans who are interacting. You can do it for dating websites. You can do it for whatever you want. You can actually quantify stuff and try and make some predictions, because predicting the future is this thing that we all want to understand, and math can actually really help you with that.
Well, speaking on behalf of the teachers and the students out there, I'm sure they learned a lot about it today, as I did. I had no idea the role that mathematics could play, in infectious disease and helping to solve some of those questions about should we release the vaccine, should we not, what's the risk going to be, and that's really what we're talking about. And I learned a ton today about that. Thank you very much for taking the time to come on the show and tell us about it. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're very, very welcome.
All right, great stuff. So thanks, everybody, for tuning in to Live Event. Check the show schedule for the next event coming up. I believe it's Ryan Marciniak from the Ontario Science Center talking about astronomy. But definitely check the website, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Have a great week. Bye-bye now.